Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Hartung. I'm with Process and Safety Solutions, and you're here today to listen to Road to Continuous Improvement. And today's subject is incident investigation. First of all, you will not have any video of not so nice looking face of mine today. I'm actually in a hotel room. We got called to a site on late last night. So we are giving this webinar today from my hotel room. So to conserve some bandwidth, I thought we'd not provide the video today. Most of you know what I look like, and so that really doesn't help the webinar that much anyway. So again, today, subject is incident investigations, and this is certainly an important part of a process safety management, in which we'll get into right now. So as you know, we've kind of been going through all of the elements of PSM, starting with management systems all the way down to management of change. And of course, today's is incident investigations. So just briefly, let's go over the regulation itself. It says the employer shall investigate each incident which resulted in or reasonably have resulted in a catastrophic release of a highly hazardous material in the workplace. And we're going to talk somewhat in detail about M1 because that's important. The next one is an accident shall be initiated as promptly as possible, but not later than 48 hours following the incident. An incident investigation shall be established in at least one person knowledge and process involved, including an employee of the incident involved or a contractor as well. So let's just talk briefly about M2 before we go on about promptly started within 48 hours. And a lot of people will look at this and say, well, I can't do the full investigation in 48 hours. And really, this just talks about beginning or initiating it, at least starting it. So having some documentation showing that you have started that investigation is what you need. And of course, one person could, when we look at M3, one person could theoretically do the investigation, but you really want to have others involved in that. A good investigation is going to involve not only those that understand the process that you're going to be used or the process involved in the incident, but also operations and maybe engineering would be people you want to involve as well. So M4 essentially talks about the report and the fact that you must generate a report with some specifics in there. For example, the date of the incident, date the investigation began, description of the incident, the factors that contributed to the incident, and I normally call those causal factors, and any recommendations resulting from the investigation. I also often ask the question in PSM training that I do, how many recommendations must be made for an investigation? Normally we get numbers all over the place, but the key information you want to take away from M4, in the most cases, you should always have at least one action item or recommendation that comes out in an investigation. A lot of times there's many, and I will tell you that probably 90% of all investigations that we do, training will always be one of those recommendations. We can always get better in training. We never arrive at a well-trained workforce. So M5, system shall establish a system, promptly address and resolve the incident items or the recommendations. And then the report shall be reviewed with all affected personnel whose job tasks are relevant to the incident findings. And then of course, the incident investigation reports shall be retained for 5 years. And that 5 years really has to do with the fact that your PHA is revalidated or redone every 5 years, and certainly incidents should be part of your PHA revalidation process, as we talked about when we reviewed the PHA element earlier. So what's the purpose and intent of incident investigation? It really can be boiled down to just two things: continuous improvement, and it allows us to better manage risk. And how do we do that? How do we better manage risk and achieve continuous improvement? It's through investigating the causes. What are the causes for that incident to occur? There are many causes. There can be multiple causal factors within each incident. And as we investigate incidents, we're going to find when we do a thorough job of those investigations, we're going to find many causal factors that can be addressed. What you normally want to do is take those that are probably the most critical and address those through recommendations. But certainly, if you want to get better, you need to look at all of the causal factors that were involved. We must report and communicate those incidents. So keeping incidents to ourselves, for example, management say, well, you know, I don't want to tell anybody about this, it make us look bad. But really, when it comes down to continuous improvement, we need to be able to communicate all of these incidents with all of our people, with all of our employees. That feedback a lot of times helps us to get better. Others can see things that we might have not seen if we keep all of these things close to our chest. More importantly, anything, we need to apply the learnings. So if you do an investigation and don't learn anything from it and don't apply those learnings, you just wasted your time. And really, that's what continuous improvement is taking those learnings and updating our management systems so that we can reduce the risk associated with those things happening again. So as we always talk about, we talk about gaps, and we look at where some of the gaps are based on our compliance audits that we've done over the years. And here again, we're going to look at some of those today. Right now, we're up to about 310, I think, compliance audits that this information was gathered from. The first one is failure to define with some consistency what types of incidents should be investigated. And we're going to be talking about this in greater detail in general, because we see this quite often. So I haven't put a percentage on this one here because we see it almost in all compliance audits. There's inconsistency on what gets investigated, what does not. What is a major incident? What is a minor incident? We see that quite often, and I'm not sure the difference between the two. So, and most facilities are not sure about the difference between those two as well. But we also see failure to communicate investigation results as the biggest item in terms of compliance with the regulation itself. 63% of the audits we do, normally there's something that was not communicated on an incident, and we really need to communicate those incidents with our employees, especially if their job is affected by it. If they're working in a process and they're an operator in that process, they need to be given that information and provided that information on not only the causal factors, but what were the recommendations and what were the actions being taken to address those. Next one is just fail to report incidents, period. A lot of facilities still do not report incidents at all. In fact, we were at a facility, in the facility that I'm in actually today, one of the comments was made, we don't report things if we find them. So if one of our employees find those, we don't report those. We only report those things that go outside the fence. So obviously that's an issue that has to be addressed. If it's only things that get outside the facility, and that's the only time you report anything, we're not really learning a lot by that. And sooner or later, those things will get outside the fence, and they could have catastrophic results, not only outside the fence, but within the facility as well. The next one is a failure to develop actionable response. In other words, it's failure to develop recommendations or action items from those incidents. A lot of times facilities will do an investigation, and we're not going to necessarily call it a formal or informal investigation at this point in time, just an investigation, which they call an investigation, don't have any recommendations. They just documented that they did an investigation, no recommendations as a result. Even when you look at the report, you can kind of see that based on the report and the findings that they had, there should have been some recommendations that should have resulted. The next is the failure to investigate incidents that could result in a catastrophic event. And it's a little bit different than the first one, and just in the fact that most facilities are not sure what needs to be investigated with which or not. In fact, we've got a number of facilities still that list minor and major incidents and then don't define what major and minor incidents are. Failure to complete action items or recommendations in a timely manner is another one, 49%. So almost 50% of all of the incidents, reports, and investigations that we do, or audits we do, we find over 50% of those audits that we look at have some issues one way or another when it comes to compliance. The last one is just a failure to initiate an investigation in a timely manner. And again, this has to be done within 48 hours. Often what times happens is the report, the incident occurs on, for example, Monday, and they don't report it until Wednesday. Well, the incident actually happened on Monday, so you had within 48 hours to initiate the investigation, but they didn't develop the report until Wednesday. So you're already 48 hours past that period of time of the incident itself. So that's where some of these come into play. Here's something that I want you to consider, and this is something that comes up in all of our facilities, in all of our audits, all of our training. We talk about this particular item. When you look at the standard itself, and we went back to M1, these words are in there. It says, could reasonably have resulted in a catastrophic release of a highly hazardous chemical. What does that mean? It's not very plain language, and we certainly would all differ somewhat if I ask each of you that on this webinar today what you believe it reasonably could result in a catastrophic release. I could almost guarantee you that we'd have all different kinds of answers. I often tell people in my training, it's like, for example, in traffic tickets or speeding, if the law says you can be served a ticket for speeding if the officer reasonably expects the speed that you were going could have reasonably resulted in somebody getting hurt or killed, etc. Could you imagine all of the confusion that would create? Well, that's kind of how this one is. We don't have a real good definition of what reasonably could result in a catastrophic release means. However, one thing that we do have, and we do know, that PSM and the regulation itself is a performance standard. So it doesn't tell you, for example, what this means for a specific reason. So if you're in an ammonia refrigeration facility, we know that 300 ppm of ammonia is IDLH conditions. If we are in an oil and gas facility, we know that LEL for various flammables is going to vary and be different, right? So we know that if we're in an LEL condition, we know that that could reasonably result in a catastrophic incident, fire, explosion, etc. Fire explosions in oil and gas are never good. They can always result in catastrophic release. So that could be one of your starting points for determining when you do an investigation. When it comes to ammonia, for example, we said 300 parts per million is IDLH. Maybe that's when we ensure that an investigation gets done. So if you have a release that's greater than the amount that could result in IDLH conditions, then an investigation should be done. Now, there are no hard and fast rules on that, but certainly that could be a starting point that you'd want to look at. And that, again, it would be reasonably looking at what could reasonably result in catastrophic release. So again, we talk about what a major incidents are, what a minor incident is. I don't know what those are. So you guys have to describe and document in your policies and procedures what are those minor and major incidents if you can actually document that. One of the things I also recommend is that you look at your PHA, and also you look at your process safety information, or PSI, when it relates to safe upper and lower limits of the process. If you refer back to your PHA, a lot of times you may document a release of something result in, or could potentially result in, fire and explosion, or personnel injury, etc. If those particular items in your PHA are listed as such, then those should be things that you could pull forward into determining whether or not you need to do an investigation or not. So all of those documentation, all that documentation, including your PHA, and when you do an investigation should pretty much look the same. So if you're doing investigations on huge or large releases, and you're not doing investigations on things within the PHA that would indicate you should be doing an investigation, then you have a gap that you need to address. The other thing is loss of primary containment, another thing to look at. And what we mean by loss of primary containment, if the chemical that you're using in your process is outside of its intended location, pipe, vessel, tank, etc., then an investigation might be warranted. I believe you should do an investigation whenever you have a loss of primary containment. And I'm not talking about leaks out of, de minimis leaks out of valves, etc., that your maintenance tech or something like that comes across and needs to fix. It's really those things. For example, you have a corrosion that allowed a valve to leak, or you had corrosion that created a leak in piping, or somebody left the valve open, or something like that. Any of those things should result in an investigation. A lot of times what we see is investigations. We believe investigation has to be formal, and they can be fairly informal. You can sit down and brainstorm within 10, 15 minutes over a small incident. At least we document what's going on, and the more information that we have to determine what are some of the causal factors involved in some of these incidents, the better we will be at improving our process safety and minimizing our risk. If you want to improve process safety, you must learn from the errors and the mistakes, even when they are small or what we may think is insignificant. A lot of times those things that we think are very insignificant turn out to be things that happen every day or several times in a day. Sooner or later, they're going to lead to a bigger incident. So investigation should complete a causal analysis, some sort, develop causal factors. And a lot of times people will say, well, do we need to develop the root cause? Maybe, but I'm more interested in all of the causal factors. Typically, there's just not one root cause. There's sometimes many. So if we look at all of the causal factors involved and address each of those accordingly, then we'll address the basis for the incident itself. Once you've completed the investigations, then we want to determine who is responsible and accountable for the findings, writing a recommendation to address each of those causal factors, and then who is accountable, who's responsible for making those done. And of course, address timing and when the items can be completed. Certainly, action items should be completed as quickly as possible. It shouldn't go on for years and in some cases, not even months. There will be some instances, I'm sure, where there are going to require major capital improvements to be made because of an incident, et cetera. Certainly those can take longer, but most of the time training and other things that come out of incident investigation should be done fairly quickly. Also list all those who participated in the investigation, their roles and responsibility. That's always important to know as you're looking back on incidents to determine who was involved in the investigation, who you got from an operation standpoint. Did we do a thorough enough job of the investigation itself? And sometimes we can learn from the investigation and as to how it was written, how it was conducted, to determine whether or not we can make some improvements in our investigation processes themselves. So the best practice is always to use team approach, people from different backgrounds. For example, in fact, that's what we're doing here right now, is we're doing an investigation, and we like to have as many operators involved in that process as possible. Certainly we want some engineers if they're available too, but certainly as many people as possible that know how the process works and what they actually do versus what they're expected to do. A lot of times we will find that operators will each operate a little bit different. And we need to know that information so that we can really identify those causal factors. And if they're operating it different, each of them operating a little bit different, I think we would all know that that's a causal factor that we need to address. And certainly we want to address those. Investigate near misses, good catches, and others. A lot of times we only look at those things that are big. A lot of times if we can look at a near miss and we get in a habit, we have that culture of reporting near misses as well, we are going to get much better. A lot of times we can look at something that, hey, that's a good catch. I'm glad you brought that up. For example, if we're really pushing people to report, even when we think we're not going to do an investigation on it, reporting it is good. We get that culture in our facilities. We no doubt will get better in reducing our risk and reducing our incidents. Identify the significant causal factors involved. And a lot of times, like I said, you can have many causal factors in any incident. Addressing those significant ones is the most important to address. Obviously, we'd like to look at all of them, but we need to pick and choose. Always develop recommendations to address each causal factor if gaps in your process safety management system needs to be addressed. And I will almost guarantee you that in all cases, whenever you do an incident investigation, it should result in your management system being updated or changed or improved to address those issues. Again, recommendations should always be made. I don't know of any instance where an investigation would result in a recommendation of some sort. A management plan must be put in place to address the key findings. Share all your findings and resolution with all personnel. I see no benefit withholding information from anyone in your facility that makes sense, that operates with that process. Again, we're in all of this together. If I'm in a plant, I feel I'm part of that plant because anything happens to them, it happens to me in one way or another. Maybe I don't get hurt, but certainly I have friends, I have family, I have others working in that facility that could be involved. Again, maintain the incident reports for 5 years or until the next PHA for sure. And then of course, apply learnings to PHA during that revalidation. A lot of times we focus only on the incident itself. We don't look at it from a global perspective. What I mean by that is we may focus on one area of the process where the incident occurs, and we're looking for causal factors to why the incident occurs. But in the grand scheme of things, it could happen throughout that process because those same factors that were involved could be influenced throughout the facility. So that's why that PHA needs to look at it from a global perspective as well. I believe that every facility should go back and develop or update their policy to provide guidance on what a near miss is. Remember, I talked about the fact that what reasonably could result in a catastrophic incident. Define what that means. A near miss is anything that, in my opinion here, is anything in which you have loss of primary containment. But there can be other things involved as well. Know what is to be investigated. You don't always need to do an formal investigation. It can be somewhat informal as well. Use a methodology to determine root cause and causal factors. You know, some people use cause mapping, and I for one am a firm believer in using cause mapping because it's quick and easy process to use, and most people can be trained how to use that methodology. So therefore, any incident, you can do a quick 5 why on any incident to determine whether or not even you want to take this into a formal investigation. So certainly doing a quick and dirty with a 5 why, it's certainly a good way to go. Complete all action items in a timely manner. Apply the learnings, procedures, policies. A lot of times our procedures may not get updated, or policies don't change the result of incident, and they really need to. Again, training, I can almost guarantee you that almost every incident, for the most part, will have some training causal factor involved. And so making sure that our employees and others are trained in those policies and procedures and how we can get better at reducing risk in our facilities. Also, there might be some learnings that we have to apply to our PHA. So make sure that you retain those incident investigations and use those in your PHA, again, to look at the global issues that might be involved. Remember, we will always have incidents. It's part of risk management. If somebody tells you that, hey, we do incident investigations to eliminate incidents, probably not true, because I don't know of any facility that will not have zero incidents, where PSM is really talking about managing risk. So we're always going to have some type of incidents. What we're trying to do is manage the risk such that we minimize the incidents we have. But even if we minimize, even the ones that we do have are not catastrophic in nature. They're smaller. Those are the near misses that we're spending time addressing those rather than addressing large fire explosions, major releases and toxicity releases and people going to the hospital. That's what we're trying to eliminate. We don't want those in our facilities. We can control what is acceptable risk. That's something we can control. We can't control the risk somebody else takes. Within our facility, we can control the risk in our processes. We can control what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. And we can eliminate and reduce unacceptable risk. And that's what we need to do by identifying causes and address each of those. Remember, some causal factors may indicate lack or inadequate training. Every investigation for us. You can't fix what you don't know is broke. If you think about that, if we're not doing reporting, if we're not doing incident investigations, then we can't fix what we don't know. So the more we know, the better we will be. The better we can be at risk reduction. So encourage reporting. Encourage, even if it's not something we're going to do an investigation on. Develop a culture in which reporting is ongoing. It's easy to do. There's no ramifications to employees as a result of reporting. Give them the ease of access also to report. For example, we develop software for some of our clients that it's easy for anybody to report. They can report that incident, and then somebody can determine whether or not it needs to be investigated or not. But we always encourage reporting to take place. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions, and feel free to ask your question here in the Q&A. And the first question I have on methodology and best practice. Methodology, like I said, the best practice I think is using maybe things like cause mapping, and that's actually a methodology that you can use for determining root cause or causal factors. And it's called cause mapping, and it's pretty popular. So that I would say would be one of the better tools that you can use. Also, there's software out there, things like Taproot that's been around for a number of years. Certainly, that is a good process as well. But I think it's important that we use some type of tool and document it through that tool as well. Again, good catches are things like, if you come across if somebody's walking through the process and they happen to see a plug out of a valve or a valve partially left open or something like that, but there's nothing coming out, well, that might be a good catch. Just like in a lockout tagout situation, if you see a lock or an energy source not locked out and you catch it before something happens, that's a good catch, or a near miss that certainly should be investigated. Okay, any more questions? I'll just give you a couple more minutes if you got in and give you an opportunity to type, because you're probably not as fast at, or you're probably a lot faster at typing than I am. I can talk fast, but I'm not the best at typing. So. Okay, so that wraps up today's webinar. Next week or the next month, I believe we will be doing emergency response. So we're nearing the end of the elements, and due to popular demand on this, we'll probably bring this back next year, kind of revise things a little bit in terms of opportunities to get you guys to bring more questions. And really, I want these to be opportunities for us to learn. Also, we have a webinar coming up in January in which we're going to be discussing the 10th Circuit Appeals Court ruling on coverage. And that happened to be a case that I was involved in. And so we are also have invited a law firm called Holland and Hart, who's going to join us that day. So we're going to kind of be doing a joint webinar on that decision and why it's important for us to understand what the ramifications of that decision are to each of your facilities. For the most part, it probably doesn't affect you that much, but certainly it addresses the issues of coverage. A lot of times there's questions regarding interconnectivity, and when you have one vessel connected to another through a piping, where does PSM coverage stop? And that is what that case was really about. So currently, I think we're trying to set that up for sometime in January. So hopefully you'll join us for that as well. So I appreciate everyone. If I don't talk to you before then, I hope each of you have a happy holiday and get some time to spend with your families. And then also be safe. I know there's a lot of COVID cases all throughout the country. I just hope that each of you stay safe and healthy, and we can see you next year for the next webinar. Y'all have a great holiday, and we'll see you then. Thank you.